I really think that within the past 25 years, we have gone a long way towards having a democratic system. I think we have the four pillars, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and the media. I think we've done a lot of that for many of the countries in Africa. And I always prefer to compare Namibia to Africa and not to Europe, because Africa is Africa. I think the press is very free. I think there is open debate in Parliament. Even civil society plays quite an independent role. They are not yet seen as, foreign-funded enemies of the state that want to undermine the state, as you so often hear when you talk about Africa. We are not there yet, but I think we are very far on the way there. We still need to do something about the expression of the will of the people when it comes to elections. Because the problem that we have had since independence, and it's a common problem also, especially in the SADC region, is that the playing field is never the same. And basically, as long as the playing field is not the same, you can call elections free and fair or whatever, it still does not mean that it is equal. And for a democratic state, I think that is an absolute necessity. There is party funding, but the party funding that comes is a drop in the ocean in comparison to what the governing parties have. So I think there is a historical reason for it. And the newspaper, like the Namibian, was deemed to be a communist infiltrated opposition to the South African government. There was no freedom of the press, and the press was divided on color lines. There were the newspapers that were for the white population and the newspapers that were for the black. So apart from the armed struggle and the diplomatic struggle that was fought outside the country, we also had the struggle inside the country, which to a large extent was carried by the churches, through the Council of Churches, but also through newspapers like the Namibian. And I think it built up a credibility of being critical and open and honest, and that 25 years after independence, they are still critical. And sometimes people feel they are too critical, and people talk about anti-government and so on, but the establishment has got no objection to it. There was a time when it was banned. Banned in not in the sense that you couldn't read it, but you couldn't spend government money to buy the Namibian for government offices. So you saw people always putting it under the file, but that stopped also. So I think it is that history of the Fourth Estate playing an important part in letting the voice of the people known. If you, for example, would read the Namibian, well, I don't suppose you read Afrikaans, but in the Republican it's the same thing. They have a special page for SMSs. And so people can talk about anything they want to talk about. They are not supposed to swear and use abusive language, but everybody can say what they want to say about the outgoing president, the incoming president, all of that. And our poor incoming president, every day there's about 10 pieces of advice that he's getting. I don't know how much he's going to listen to. Oh, definitely, yes. I mean, even the people have grown much more. Look, when we had our first president, this was a wonderful thing. We became a sovereign state, we became independent, we had the president, but all the additional embellishments that we've had, we did not really know. So there was no big deal about having, the founding president's picture around. And it wasn't also as expensive as this one.
That's the difference.
Excuse me. And also bearing in mind that the unemployment figure is very high, that the Gini coefficient is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I think at one point Namibia was number one on the list. That the poor are getting poorer. I think that is what makes people being even more critical. And the youth is becoming more critical even within their established political parties, because right now quite prominent members of the Youth League of the governing party of SWAPO are talking about revolutionary land grabbing. So they've been suspended, but you know, they can still openly talk about it. So basically, I think it would be very difficult to clamp down on the press because of the role that people have played. And we're a small population, and the people who wrote then are still writing now to some extent. So I think that's why.
Yes, I see.
But for us, the fourth estate is definitely, it is in our vocabulary, it is in our political understanding, in our understanding of democracy. Well, there was no large playing field for political activity and political opposition. You see, Namibia was treated as sort of the fifth colony of South Africa. And most of the draconian laws that they've had were tried out here first.
Right.
So especially when the political parties started, SWAPO started going into the armed struggle, and the leaders were arrested here and sent to Robben Island. You then had the situation that certain things had to be done. And you had to do it under a cloak and dagger situation. So the churches became very involved. And liberation theology, as it was imported from Latin America, became a large part of our theology. And at one point, the bishops of the two largest churches, the Roman Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church, wrote an open letter, not just to the government, but also open to the world, to say that South Africa has no right. So what actually happened was that these NGOs started playing, especially the churches. They were called the ecumenical arm of SWAPO. That's what we were called. And it was almost a duplication of government, because we had a Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Legal Assistance, and all of that. So basically, it was really preparing people. And if you look today, most of us who were working for the Council of Churches are having high positions. I mean, the Bishop Emeritus of the Lutheran Church, who is now part of the cabinet of the new president. They've also been, and it's his second stint. So we've had church leaders also in government. The biggest thing about the role of the churches as civil society organization is that over 80% of the Namibian population are Christians. So it was easy to organize. And so it was also easy to organize other organizations, like we started a women's movement called the Namibia Women's Association, which tried to get together women to talk about oppression of women as blacks and as women, because you know the laws that were there at that time was that a woman is never mature. She falls under her father and after that under her husband. So that was part of it also. And then we had the introduction of conscription. And we then started an anti-conscription campaign, which was also run by civil society organizations, and which was deemed to be a big enemy. So, but you had a situation where any boy who looked like 16 or over, if he was sent to the shop by his parents, he would be picked up and taken to the front. So a lot of what we did is to go at night, get hold of these kids, and many of them went abroad and came back fully qualified. We had especially also the important role of the churches was that we did a lot of education. because we had contact with the World Council of Churches, the Lutheran World Federation, 10 Church Aid, all these aid organizations. So one could organize scholarship programs and send people to school. When we had the first schools open to blacks, the Anglican school, St. Paul's, St. George's, and the other one, St. Paul's. Well, it was now open, and so they couldn't stop people from going, but then they decided to put up the fees, which almost cut out the blacks. So part of the work that we did then was to pay school fees for those kids. Yeah. Look, the whole issue has to do with the political will and the role that women have played and the demands that they have made. If the SWAPO Women's Council had not been as strong as they were at that last Congress and pushed ahead, this may not have happened. But SWAPO is not the first party. The Congress of Democrats, of which I was the vice president, started off with a zebra. Really? We were formed on that basis. But of course it's a smaller party, so nobody was talking about it. But what is significant, as you say, it's not legislated. So nobody is forced to do that. But once the decision was taken, and President Pohamba was very strong on that issue to say it's 50-50, that's what happened. Now, the incoming president has the right to choose 8 members of parliament who will not have the vote, but they're members of parliament. And he chose 5 men and 3 women. And everybody was up in arms. What is this? It's 50-50. Well, you know, he's not even president yet and already he's mess. And he made it very clear. He said it's not policy of government, it's the policy of SWAPO. And the appointment of 8 people has got nothing to do with the party. It's a governmental thing. So. Well, I think if you look at most of developing countries, where the majority is as large as it is, obviously you carry out the wishes of the party that has put you there. And it was very adamantly put right here in Namibia. The SWAPO manifesto is the basis on which this country is going to be run.